consolidated with Winnebago. And so they had a little better tax base. Actually, White School and Westfield indicated they were going to join too, but then they changed their mind. See, most of the one-room schools they got up to be about 100 years old, and that was their community. So they hated to give it up. This is the program that was for the dedication in 1925. And this had to do with how much they were paid in 1932. Earl Dugan was the superintendent, and he got $2,000 a year. John Rodenius, who followed him but as a teacher, he was earning $12.50. And we don't know all of these people, but Miss Ruth Scheider, who was Mrs. Cash, was $900. Dorothy Scriven was $1,123. And Viola Winter came special just to teach music. She was Bonnie Newton's aunt. And she had inherited a house in Winnebago, and she taught music lessons otherwise. It said they hadn't decided on the salaries of the bus driver and the custodian, but they had been getting $95 for one and $80 a month. And then they talk about a couple other schools, which we'll see in our pictures of consolidation. It was Mrs. Ruby Dean Volkert, who lived in Peck for many years, that was teaching Sheldon at $105 a month. Well, let's move on then. That's the building. And if you ever went there, there were all levels of school in there somewhere. The center in the bottom level was the home ec room. The middle section in the middle was basically junior high school. And the top, the big area there was the study hall with the library on one side. And on this side, they had a biology built area. On the other side, upstairs, they had the secretarial. Miss Pettis taught there. But I went to 3rd grade in the middle on the north side, 4th grade in the basement part there, and then at 5th and 6th, we went out to the annex buildings, which were added on. And the furthest annex building was the 1st grade for many years with Miss Scriven. Can you identify anyone there? Yes.
Oscar Brower, George McGee.
Right, George McGee is up above, then Frederick Schmoke.
On the right,
Who?
lower right.
Yes, right. This is Mr. Brower,
Oscar
Oscar,
Brower's on the farmhouse.
and Dr. Elson, and John, Roy B. Anderson, the supervisor.
Use your pointer so.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. There's some more, so I'll go hunt the pointer just a minute.
We spent good money for that pointer, John.
There we go.
Are you ready for the next one?
We'll go back. No, go back. Go back.
Okay, you want to do it again? Okay.
Okay. At the top, George McGee, Mr. Schmoke. Is this the one that repaired the cars? I'm not sure. Oscar Brower, Dr. Elson, Roy B. Anderson, Clarence Nevins. When Clarence finished his terms, they said he had served the longest of anyone. But this was the group that they didn't change a whole lot after they consolidated for quite a while. Okay, this was the faculty, and John Rowley was the principal and superintendent some of the time. And we can thank him for the yearbooks because he practically edited them himself some of the years. And he has extra pictures. Randy dedicated a whole, that outside the room, there's a whole case there with things in it. And I found a lot of things. I even found pictures of the teachers that were negatives, and I had to find somebody who would develop them. Okay. Jean McNair, you know what she did? Right. But she was from right here, so she got a school name for her. This is Mr. Pulaski, and he was the coach, very popular, and eventually he went to East High, and some Pulaskis have basically coached ever since. It's grandchildren by now. Dorothy Scriven, and she was rather unique because she came to Winnebago and stayed with Mrs. McMichael during the week, and then she rode home to her parents. She lived south of Belvedere, and she did that her whole career. Mrs. Cash, who did almost everything at the high school. She was the class advisor and on. Yearbook, she almost always did that too. I can't read all these.
Put the pointer up next to it and I'll tell you.
All right, this one.
Michael Griddlebaugh,
Yeah,
okay, I have no idea. Helen Sanger,
yes. And this is,
Mrs. Edna Sartorius,
yes, and they got married afterwards.
and, okay,
She had taught, her parents lived in Rydot, and she taught in the school that the History Society moved at 1 year.
and that's Owen Fordham,
Okay. See, some stayed a long time and some didn't.
Elizabeth, Preezer,
Okay.
I can't read it either. William Giesecke.
Yes, Willard Giesecke was a wonderful music teacher, and he ended up in Rochelle, but he married one of the Brower girls.
And Loretta Coburn, and Frida Uland.
Okay.
Okay.
This is one of the music groups. There aren't very many. I have a list over here, and if you're interested, you can come over. It's all typed up. This is Josephine Nelson right here. And this is she was a Hassel, and then she was Mrs. Sartorius, Don Sartorius. And she was school secretary for Margaret. Thank you. But I don't think we can go through all of those. Okay, now we get into something more complicated. This is a new district. And if you figure it out, it was, this is the county line somewhere right here, going west. But that was District 321 when it included Winnebago, Seward, Burritt, and Pecatonica together. And Mrs. McMichael, who was the one who took the notes for the school board, she wasn't on it, but she insisted that Pecatonica came and said, why don't we get together? And they agreed to do it. It only lasted some years, but they accomplished certain things by doing that. For instance, they had a principal at each of the two high schools. And then they had 8th grade in Seward instead of high school, because the Seward High School only included 3 years. And so their graduates had to go somewhere else if they wanted to go on in school to finish the 4th year somewhere else. Mostly Leaf River, but sometimes Pecatonica. But this was, when I came, it was like this. And you could see that the West Heights district was not included in this district. They had a professional superintendent whose name was Dintelman, and he kept an office in Seward, so he didn't play favorites with the other two. And so this was the period when they kept some of the little schools open. They were all consolidated into a district, but they weren't closed yet. And when they were closed, then they usually had the building for somebody to live in. So when the Sheldon School closed, wasn't it the, what were their names? Mambies lived there, right, exactly. Because Mr. Manby had been the head teacher at Seward in an earlier time. There were some famous people that had started in Seward. What was the one that went on to West High? Sadarguses were in charge of that for some years, right?
And Mrs. Manby taught,
PE, yes. She's still living. She moved from Egan to be closer to family, but she's still
she
living.
insisted that we all learn how to dance.
We did. Okay, it was the same building, but it, you know, this consolidation did impel you toward other things, and what it got into in the long run was that none of the buildings were adequate. This is from the 1956-55 yearbook. They said, "This is our campus." Can you recognize anything?
Yeah.
See, there are 2 in Westfield. Those were 5th and 6th grade. The Presbyterian Church hosted the hot lunch and sometimes the handicap classes. The other McMichael house, straight across from the church, was used for, Mrs. Simon taught there when my sister, who's 70 this year, started 1st grade. It was in that building. We also had music classes in that building for a while. We walked over there. Music became a problem after I got here. There was never the same music teacher more than 1 year. And one didn't last the year. Until Dixie, you know, all those years. We had other people, but we had our band practice in the basement of the Methodist church. And for a while, we used the town hall for the middle school band. We walked down there.
Tell them where we played basketball.
Was that in the town hall?
No, Seward.
Seward. Okay. I think that what had happened there was that they built the girls' locker room on the end of the gym floor so that it wasn't big enough anymore. And so we always rode over to Seward for all the games. The annex building started with the ag class, and that was there alone. And then they built the 2 grade school, and 1st grade was on this end.
We all called them chicken coops. The chicken coops.
Well, they were a little better than that, but not much. They were there. You know what happened to them, don't you? Afterwards? Jim Herbert cut them in pieces and he took them down to his properties, and some of them are like garages or whatever. I know because one of the pieces fell off when he went by my house. Okay, this is the Burritt Center School, which was when we split from Pecatonica. A lot of people in Burritt were trying to get one school in their township. And so what they did was to say to each separating district, will you give us a school? And Pecatonica said yes, they would. And that's why we have this wild arrangement here. Some people are very close to Winnebago, but they go to Pecatonica. And there was this two-room school on Telegraph Road, which they used for grades. But finally, in our period now, the parents there said, we don't want our kids to go to that little school. Bus them all to Pecatonica. And so they've sold it. It's now a house. That's Mrs. Roots, that lady that we read about that was teaching that class. This is the same thing as you can see down here. That's our district. The reason it's like that is everyone had their choice. They could paste theirs on one district or the other as long as it didn't have islands. It had to be contiguous. So, the top sections of Seward Township joined Pecatonica outright, several miles down, and the rest of it, most of it, joined ours. And there is a little piece over here that's in Stevenson County, and we have one little section up above that's in Owen Township. See that little cube? One farmer, Soners, decided they wanted to join Winnebago District, and so they annexed to it before all the problems with the courts and everything. Because Evergreen School District, which was down here, wanted to join ours, and by that time, the judge said no, because you have to pay the extra money that all these things are costing us, and so nobody can leave anymore. But there were pieces down here that they weren't in Rockford, but they joined Stillman Valley instead. That was successful when they tried to do that. It was called Kishwaukee Community School before, and they joined it as a unit. Does any of that raise any questions? We have pictures of all the schools otherwise. Yes?
Yeah, this does. Is that 72 that I see on the right there towards the, I can't quite read it.
Yeah,
But now, so this is just before we joined you?
right. Centerville was still separate,
Still separate, but ended up, okay.
because this would have been what was left of the old Weldon district, and the other was the Centerville district.
Okay, that's Weldon and us. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, John?
Yes.
While you're on it, I had a discussion with Ms. Colburn years ago, and the county superintendent of schools was kind of new, and he thought, gee, you're all mixed up over there on that west side, and I could probably straighten those boundaries up. And Colburn said, you want to start World War III?
Actually, if you look at the library district, it's like that too. And there were some places when they separated out and did the legalities that were in neither one. You weren't in any library district, so you couldn't go to either one. And finally, Pecatonica said, we will take in everybody who's not in a district now. And they agreed upon it, and so everybody's in one. See, library districts are not, you don't have to have them. So some places have them and some don't. And if you're outside the city of Rockford, but your kids go to Rockford schools, for a while they were giving free cards, and then they said, this is costing too much. So you have to go pay to get a library card for your kid too.
John,
Yes,
how long was the district, all
together.
4 townships together? How many years was it all consolidated with Seward, Burritt, Pecatonica?
I don't think it lasted much more than 5 years.
Now, tell them about World War III, when they started to force us together.
Okay.
So what was the
It was
impetus?
World War III.
Well, there were people who went out and campaigned for each district, and they would get down with the map and say, well, you could be in this one.
Well, they wanted us to be all one. And
Yes, when we voted on, within the district, we voted, and there were 2 high school locations along West State on the way, and there was one in Pecatonica, but there was not one in Winnebago at all. And that's when the Winnebago people had meetings and decided to secede.
You said that very nicely, but.
So essentially, there was a consolidation in 1948, and then there was a deconsolidation.
Yeah, Winnebago seceded
So
in
that was
Form
still legal at that time?
323.
It was still legal to separate at that
Oh,
time?
yeah, you could always petition, as long as you could get it passed.
There was a referendum vote.
Well, it was to form a separate district, right?
Yeah, they were gonna, force us to, they were gonna close Pecatonica School, close Winnebago School, and have a big one on.
In between, right.
Out about, they were talking about out there about where, New Life churches, out in that area where they had talked about building.
Well, there were 2 different locations, because I have a ballot
Yeah.
that, yeah, there were 2
Well, in that
different,
area is where
Yes,
they were
right.
talking about doing it. Pecatonica said, no, we don't want to go there, and Winnebago said, no, we don't want to go there.
yeah, yeah.
So, my question, so if everybody in that consolidated district is voting, how do they determine?
Only the ones that are voting, they're petitioning to withdraw from that district. So only the ones that are petitioning in that territory will vote. So you don't have to get the agreement of the ones that are being left behind. Is that the right way to say it?
You're being diplomatic, but that's about it.
Well, there were all kinds of different disagreements. And one of the things about what you brought up before, that you had to have so many kids, what they would do here is if one district got too small, they would close that school and send them to the neighboring one. And until that was, until more kids were available. So at times, the kids had to walk twice as far to get to where they were holding school that year. Because after all, what difference did it make if you were 100 years old, if you kept your school open, if you could open it the next time you had kids? And high school districts were like that too, because we had a lot of students who came to our school from Lincoln Park. And their district would pay tuition. If they chose to go to Rockford, they could ride the interurban, and it was easier. But there was a bus that went to haul kids from that direction.
In the 50s, there was no transportation.
No, there wasn't that late, but 34, some of those years, there were a lot more in those classes. Did we raise any more questions? Are there more pictures?
Yeah, just a few.
Okay.
These are all familiar.
I think these are the schools that we're familiar with. The former Winnebago High School was occupied first with my class as seniors. It was 1958. And it was not finished. They were hammering away while we sat in class. And our chemistry was laughed because nothing was hooked up. So the teacher did the experiment in front and told you about it. But, you know, you didn't do it hands-on. Okay, and we all know what happened to Dorothy Simon School. This is an addition that had been added to the old building, and they kept that. The two-story was what was built all at once. And they came to the conclusion that, you know, it had a poured floor for the upper floor. And the walls were pulling apart, so that if you put a pencil down here, it would roll over there and go down by the wall. And so they decided they had to close it, and they put all the stuff that was in the school in storage if they didn't haul it to one of the other school buildings. And they accommodated all the kids in the other buildings for the year. It was a whole year. Most of the cost of it was paid by the architect firm because they had neglected to have enough, because they had to drill holes and then, you know, sort of pull it together and stabilize it, because otherwise it would have fallen. McNair was built with the same plan as Simon. They said they saved money that way. So, you know, it's basically a two-story square building. And this is the last thing that's been passed to build. Right now, we're on the third referendum in March. By the way, there are a few little folders out there on the table as you go out, if you'd like to take one, if you haven't been getting them in the mail all the time. But a lot of troubles came up in between because they were going to cut all the budget when my daughter was a senior. They were going to get rid of music and sports and so forth and cut everything. And what they did was they collected voluntary donations to cover all those salaries.
That's what
That was the,
Yes, that's the beginning of Foundation for Educational Excellence. But they got done collecting and they didn't have enough, so they said, please send us more. And the second time they got enough to get rid of the cuts, and then a referendum passed. It was simply how much income there was. It wasn't a building that they were in trouble about.
What year was that? The one you're talking about now? What
Oh,
year?
you'll have to tell me, because
The
high school.
when they raised $170,000,
Oh,
what year was that? That was,
Late 70s.
yeah, late 70s.
No.
No. 90s.
89 or 90.
Yeah, the late 70s was when everybody moved out from Rockford, because Rockford got cut in sports. Because I graduated in 78 with Jane, and it was when we were juniors in 77 that Rockford started coming out. And we were the last fourth grade class also in the old school. That was the old high school. We were the last class in fourth grade there. Mrs. Bechtold, I know, was my teacher.
Okay.
And then we moved into the Jean McNair school then,
Mhm.
and then they tore it down.
Did you spend fifth grade in high school in some of the kids?
So
Mine up.
That was when they were fixing signs.
That was a different, it wasn't dated.
It was-
Yeah.
When I was in sixth grade.
A little bit of history on the football team that they had when my husband's cousin Bill Resch was in high school. They didn't have an athletic field. So Bill got out of school when there was a football game and went to his grandparents' farm and picked up all the horse manure so that they could play the football games at Resch Farms.
That's a good story.
Do you know how we got the athletic field? We weren't here yet, but it was the Legion that got the property, and they simply took a bulldozer and pushed the land from the high end all the way down to the low end and put grass on it.
Well, they kind of did that in 3 phases.
Oh, okay.
First, some of the farmers came in. With tractors and slip scopes, and soon saw that was not going to work. And then the WPA came in with wheelbarrows and planks to wheel it up on top of the pile of dirt. And that didn't work, and then the earth movers and bulldozers came in and
Finished it off. And in by Cunningham, there were some trees there, and they simply let the dirt fall down there, and they never leveled it off at all. It was just lumpy from that. Yeah.
Well, when I was in high school, we didn't have enough kids in school either to field a football team. So we, the coach found a league that played with men. So we had I think you can hear me. I use my older voice.
Stand up.
Pretty good, yeah.
That we had a 6-man football team rather than a lot.
Aren't some of the ones west of us talking about 8-man now?
Yeah.
Because they've had to be together in order to have a team, some of the districts.
But then we got big time and with full football.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Okay, I'm gonna give the microphone to Scott Whitney. Probably most of you know that he is a veteran teacher from, for Winnebago High School for, I don't know, 40, 50 years.
Only 12. And that's from 82 to 94, and it was during that time that you were talking about raising the money.
Right.
It happened during that time period. Yes, I'm the president of the Stewart Historical Society, and I just wanted to tell you about our upcoming meeting and events that you might be interested in. Oh, by the way,